Welcome everyone to Virtual Admission 101. I'm Liz Creighton, class of 2001 and Dean of Admission and Student Financial Services. And I'm so happy to have you with us tonight. It has been an unusually beautiful stretch of weather in Williamstown. So I wish for all of our sake that everybody was on campus enjoying this time together, but I'm really thrilled nonetheless to spend this time with you and have a chance to kick off your college planning process. We are joined tonight by my three terrific colleagues, who I'll introduce in just a moment, and by more than 175 Williams families from all around the world. We've got folks as close by as Williamstown and as far away as Singapore and Hong Kong. So thank you everyone for carving out this time, especially for those of you who are joining us where it's very likely early in the morning. As I mentioned, we're joined today by three terrific colleagues in the college counseling world, all three of whom also happen to be Williams alum. The first is Chris Jones, who we'll all refer to as CJ, class of 94 and upper school dean at Harvard Westlake. Sean Logan, class of 88, who is the dean of college counseling at Phillips Andover. And Allison Fury-Nowicki, class of 99, who is the chair of the counseling department at Concord Carlisle High School, just outside Boston. So thanks to the three of you for being here. I'm going to turn it over to the crew in just a moment, but before I do, just wanted to share a few reminders. This session is being recorded, so if you run into any technical difficulties, rest assured that we'll push out the recording to all of the attendees within about a week, so no need to worry there. Closed captioning is available, so please use the button down at the bottom of your Zoom screen to avail yourself of that option. And I also just wanted to remind everybody that while we're really fortunate to have so many Williams folks on tonight's program, this is really about the college process broadly and much more broadly than just Williams. If there are folks on the call who are interested in and excited about Williams, I'm thrilled to hear that, and I look forward to connecting with you all. But I'd encourage everybody to spend the next hour and a half really just immersing yourself in what you can do to be best prepared to explore a range of schools, perhaps Williams among them. We received a number of questions in advance, and thanks to everyone who submitted those. I've shared those with Sean and Allison and CJ, and so they've made sure to incorporate a lot of those questions into the presentation that they're about to do. But we'll also leave plenty of time after the presentation for Q&A. So please hold your questions until you get all the way through their presentation. And then we are going to use the chat feature to share those, and I will send them back out to our panel. So with that said, I will hand it over to the three of you and look forward to seeing everyone in about 45 minutes. Thanks, guys.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Let me get up some notes here. Allison and CJ and I are really excited to be here and participate in this program tonight. I think now this is going on 7 or 8 years of doing this programming, and we've been tweaking it all the way through to hopefully better address the needs and the questions of families and current high school students from various communities. We're going to be looking at a full range of colleges and universities. And as Liz just mentioned, we really are approaching this as sort of a broad conversation about the college process, from somewhat selective schools, non-selective schools, all the way out to highly selective schools. There's a process here that we'll talk about. We'll also try to weave in our thoughts about how we think COVID-19 has impacted the various aspects of this process as we go. And we won't be able to cover everything we normally do, but we hope we can be, helpful in your college journey. We will mostly discuss the process that the current 11th grade students should be focusing on. We realize that there are 9th and 10th grade families here, and that's great. And we will certainly discuss topics that, leading up to 11th grade year as well. But please, use the question and answer after if we didn't hit on something you're really interested in as a 9th or 10th grade parent, or 11th grade parent for that matter. And we, again, hope that, this will give you a really good overview without being overwhelming. There's a lot to sort of take in. We're only going to, talk for maybe 40, 45 minutes and then take a lot of questions. So we're going to try to give you that kind of overview. Also, before we kind of jump in to the slides, as a counseling group here, we strongly believe in focusing on, what we can control in this process and not spending a lot of time and energy and worrying about what we cannot control. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the process. But in this new landscape that COVID has created, this is an even more important mindset. Over the course of the last 2 years, college admissions offices have, changed many of their core functions and processes, including recruitment, selection, evaluation, and retention strategies. As this pandemic is hopefully coming under control, it's a fairly good bet that there will be lessons learned by the colleges from the pandemic that will continue to be used, with also the sort of return to these in-person policies and procedures. Deans and directors are really thoughtful and good people. I'm obligated to say that. My wife is a dean of admission, and Liz is a good friend. But they do care deeply about students and their well-being as they think about this process. And they're working as quickly as they can in this rapidly changing landscape to help families navigate the process. Trust that there will continue to be some flexibility as we readjust to life sort of in person. And today we'll focus on those things that we can control. So if we can go to the first slide. So yeah, here we go. And that's us. And then the next slide, please. Great. So I'm going to start talking about a little bit about reflection, then we'll go from there. So we see applying to college as a process that is developmentally important for young adults to undertake. The more the student takes control over the process, the better decisions they can make about their future. As parents, sometimes it's hard to sit back and watch them move their way through the process. But the best role you can play, I think, is to be sort of a trusted source of advice, a supportive ear, and an advocate for your child. But there are skills that a student can build in this process that will serve them well throughout their lives. Things like reflection, self-advocacy, decision-making skills, managing adult relationships, managing, dealing with a process that can be very public. We would really encourage you to let them do this. You can support them, but this process can really help them make good decisions at the end if they can really lean into it and they've done sort of the work. So where do you start? Again, some of you out there are 9th and 10th graders right now. Some of you out there are 11th graders and just probably really starting the process. What we really feel is important is probably something you don't do a lot of, and that's reflection. And why is that important? Most of you are probably, going 100 miles an hour in a forward direction, dealing with friendships, dealing with your academics, dealing with your passions and your clubs and your groups and the teams, all the while, you're trying to manage and negotiate the challenges of what's going on in the world right now. And that all gets piped into your phone, pretty much 24/7. It can be a really difficult place to stop once in a while and sort of think about what's going on. I know I'm guilty of that quite a bit, but I think it's necessary, and I do think that's sort of the starting point for this. It is sort of like stopping and actually like taking, turning around and sort of seeing, what have I just done? I would say to you, especially if you're an 11th grader right now, active reflection is something that's really important. And what I mean by active reflection is keeping track of things that matter to you, right? So if it's in your phone, in a laptop, in a notebook, wherever you might be able to do this and consistently do this, maybe over the period of the next, 4 or 5 weeks. But looking at maybe decisions you've made, people who are important to you, accomplishments, achievements you have, failures that maybe were important for your growth, intellectual ideas, topics that fascinate you. Talk with your parents, talk with your friends, talk with your teachers, ask them what they think your strengths are. What do you like about your school? What don't you like about your school? What choices have you made and how have you grown from these things, right? Write these things down. Again, it might just be bullet points. It might be really quick. You might be out for a walk tonight with your dog, listening to a podcast, and something you hear on that really gets you excited about something. Come back and write it down, right? Or maybe get you really angry about something. Come back and write that down too. But over the course of 4, 5, 6 weeks, you're going to start to create a list of different things that probably, as you start to look through them, you realize, yeah, these are sort of important things to me. And these are things you can start to use as you start the process of like, what's my next 4 years going to look like? Well, what are the things I need in that next 4 years? In my school, we call these essential questions. What are the things you're looking for as you start to kind of build your list of colleges? So again, we're going to start sort of by getting you to do some of this reflection. So anyways, we'll take it from there. Next slide.
All right. So the term fit is thrown around by college counselors so much that it probably seems pretty trite. But when recognizing that there really are more than 4,700 degree granting post-secondary institutions in the US alone, with probably 3,000 or so of those being four-year colleges and another 1,700 or so of the two-year variety, you've then got to find a way to sift through it all and figure out which ones would be the best for you. So there are numerous factors, and you can see them right here included on this slide, the ones that we consider to be most common. I'll talk about a bunch of them, not quite all, but a bunch. Academic program, this one's pretty obvious, but what area or areas of study most interest you? And of note here, if you're still unsure, please rest assured that you really are not alone. Research shows that 65% of incoming first-year students indicate that they're undecided about a college major, and of the remaining 35% who indicate a major, 50% of them wind up changing their major at least once, if not multiple times before graduation. Do you see yourself at a liberal arts institution or maybe at a comprehensive university? I would assume that most in this virtual space understand that liberal arts will understand the liberal arts and its value. But there are certainly many misconceptions about what it truly means. I share this most years when I do this talk, but for instance, here at Harvard-Westlake, I have a number of families who, when I introduce liberal arts colleges to them to consider, may say, quote, oh, you know, my child isn't interested in drawing and painting, or my child wants to major in the sciences. We who are liberal artists know that that's all a part of what we do, and it is more comprehensive. So a liberal arts education is focused more on developing critical thinking skills and learning to see and understand and analyze the world through the eyes of, say, a political science or a mathematician or historian or the like. Comprehensive universities will offer liberal arts education as well, yet they also have professional programs and training for defined areas like business, engineering, education, nursing, etc. Interestingly, many liberal arts colleges, when asked about the most popular professions for their graduates, will respond with things like business or education, even though more times than not, those are not programs that are offered on their campuses. Recruiters, though, from companies, financial or corporations, you name it, they often share that they prefer students from liberal arts schools precisely because they've been trained to have nimble and pliable minds. Size, that one seems pretty obvious, but when considering the size of your current high school, do you want something that's similar in size? Do you want something bigger? Do you want something smaller? There are a handful of categories used to describe school size. So a small school would be anything that's, say, 5,000 students or less. Medium is in that 5,000 to 15,000 range. Large is anything above 15,000. And then you have sort of the poles of those categories, sort of the super small, which would be less than 1,000, and the super big or the super large, it's probably like 35,000 or more. Smaller schools usually have more intimate seminar-style classroom settings, easier access to professors, and a greater possibility of seeing familiar faces around campus, while larger schools will usually offer a greater variety of classes, more of a rah-rah sports sort of atmosphere, anonymity if you so desire, and some big alumni bases. While each size certainly has its natural advantages, bigger schools can find ways to make themselves feel smaller. And though Williams is considered small, every EAF alum knows there aren't too many places out there with more school spirit that is had there. And though the breadth of our alumni base may be smaller, it's certainly deep nevertheless, and it's full of plenty of power and influence nationally and around the globe. Also keep in mind that small may actually be much bigger than you think. For instance, again, at my school, it's about 1,600 students. And when I ask my juniors about preferred school size, so many of them immediately respond with, oh my gosh, it just has to be bigger than Harvard-Westlake. My response to that, though, is we have 1,600 students, yet we happen to have two campuses that are split by 8 miles. So their true daily lived experience really only involves about 900 students on our upper school campus. So a college with even 1,800 students is literally double the size. School culture is another one of those things. So many of the elements of this category are greatly dependent on and closely connected to size and location, but factors like, say, political and social climate, those aren't always size dependent, and they can greatly impact your experience at the school. Would you prefer a school with a majority of like-minded peers? Do you desire to be in the minority politically? Would you want there to be a pretty even mix, or would you prefer a place where the environment is relatively apolitical? Are environmental sustainability or social justice important to you? And if so, do you seek a campus where such values are literally baked into the fabric of the institution? Or would you be more enamored with a place where you can go and spearhead their efforts and be a pioneer in that sense? Perhaps your stance on Greek life and how it may or may not define the campus social scene could be important. Or do you want a place where athletics is important to the school culture or not? Again, just some of the things to think about in terms of that. With selectivity, here's another place where honesty is important and where you should be absolutely transparent with your preferences, about your preferences with your college counselor. We'll cover this more in a section on building a college list, a balanced list. But while it's certainly fine to have selectivity thresholds, it's also important here to understand where your academic profile stands in relation to a college's acceptance rate. Cost and financial aid. The biggest takeaway here is that it's extra important conversation to have at home and to have early. Determine for starters what's affordable, and I can't stress enough here the need to be really honest. There's a story, a cautionary tale that I always share here, and when we're in person, you can see everybody's faces when I say this stuff, and you say, "Oh my gosh," you see the reactions to it. But I always share this. I once had, early in my college counseling career, a student who really, really wanted to go to Washington University in St. Louis. Her parents were clear with me about not being able to afford WashU without significant aid. But instead of having that conversation with her, they ignored it because they simply believed she'd never get in. And guess what? She got in. And the difficult conversation that they should have had back in September and October turned into an absolute thermonuclear argument in April. So do yourself a favor and don't find yourself in a similar position. If finances will play a role, look perhaps for places that are not need aware in the admissions process. Places that meet 100% of demonstrated need, places that provide no loan aid packages, places that award merit money, and or places without exorbitant price tags. Location, this is another one that's pretty obvious. Do you want to be close to home, far away, or somewhere in between? It may be difficult to answer right now, but do you see yourself living in or near your hometown eventually? If so, would you like to go away to experience something different for a few years? Or do you believe that remaining near can give you a leg up professionally with a likely robust alumni base in that area? Do you want seasons or year-round sun? And if you want seasons, is there anything is too much cold and or snow, or do you welcome as much of it as you can get? Are there regions of the country that you find more or less attractive, and do you want urban, suburban, or removed? Again, just a couple things to kind of think about with that. As you figure out the elements of an ideal school and community that mean the most to you, you'll then be able to at least find a healthy handful among the thousands of college and university options that have what you most desire. Next slide.
Okay, so how do you determine, right, what is the right fit? So I think I love listening to CJ give that part of the presentation. It makes me wish I had him as a counselor. You know, there are a variety of ways for students to learn more about colleges. You know, a lot of these we know about, things like visits to campus, and that includes tours. It could include overnights. It could include attending classes. There are also information sessions that the colleges give on campus. You can go to their website and you can research a lot of different things about the school on the website. You can look through the different majors. You can find out more about student life. Many schools are still having college admissions officers visit their schools, and there are also sort of larger fairs that are going on. I think the NACAC fair, maybe in Boston, maybe happened about a month ago. So there are things like that. I know other schools might have larger fairs like that. And then there are also some schools do offer interviews as a way for you to get to know more about the college and anything in particular that you haven't been able to find out about in your search. One of the things that at the beginning, Sean talked about how COVID-19 has impacted this process. And I think this is one of the areas where it has had a really big impact and continues to have an impact. When everything shut down in the spring of 2020, colleges really had to take like a 90-degree turn or 180-degree turn. They had to shift. They had to offer a lot of virtual options. So they started offering, almost every college or university had to do this. They had to offer a virtual campus tour. They had Zoom information sessions. They had small group sessions with students. They did interviews via Zoom, and they did virtual college fairs. And then some of them sort of offered different things here and there. I even heard of one college that offered a live walking tour with a student who would answer questions, right? They were sort of being very creative about the kinds of things that they offer. So while colleges have really shifted back to offering things on campus again, I think a lot of these options are still there, which is what I think has been such a great impact. You know, if you live on the East Coast, you're interested in going out to visit places on the West Coast, but you really can't get there because either money or time or whatever, you start here. You start with these sort of virtual options, and then you can decide if you want to do an actual visit after that. You should be using all of these tools to help you determine whether or not a college is a good fit for you. You should not, maybe we're probably going to say this a few times, but you probably heard it before, but you should not be choosing where to go based on the institution's name or reputation. College is about so much more than that. So we use these tools to really determine the fit. And while there's probably more than one that would be a good fit for you, there are probably some that are not going to be a good fit for you. So at the same time, while you're sort of learning about these schools and determining what is a good fit, many colleges will be tracking a student's interest based on their engagement with a number of these pieces. Now, I want to just preface this by saying there are many colleges that don't track this information. I think Williams is one of them, but there are still many that do track interest levels. So how much interest has the student shown? Have you visited? Have you attended an information session? If they have interviews, have you had one? So in some of these cases too, I want to say they're tracking clicks even. So if you're getting an email, did you open the email? If there was a link in the email, did you click on the link in the email? How deep have you gone into their website? It's a little bit unnerving to think that some colleges are doing this, and I wouldn't say that they all are, but there are some that do track this information to see, you know, not just that you're sort of that you're superficially interested, but that you really are trying to learn more about them, and that as you showing this interest and continue to show interest, that you really do understand what college this is and what they offer. In some ways, it's you have more access now to colleges than you maybe did in the past because of all of these virtual options. So I would say open every email, I guess is my last piece of advice, right? Open every email. If there's a link, open it and create online accounts when they tell you to. So next slide.
Thanks for that, Allison. And you're so right about all that. We'll now offer some advice on how to build a list of colleges to which you should ultimately apply. In doing so, it's impossible to overstress here the importance of making sure that your list is balanced. And a primary rule of thumb is that students should develop a list of schools that fit into varying ranges of selectivity. For our purposes today, and as you see there, we'll refer to those ranges as likely, possible, reach, and unlikely. And keep in mind that the percentages you see here are relative to the individual student and their profile, irrespective of the overall acceptance rates at each institution. For instance, a reach school for one student could very well be a possible or even a likely for another. And regardless of how strong a student's academic profile may be, there truly are a handful of uber selective schools out there with overall acceptance rates hovering near or below 5%. And those, quite honestly, are at least reaches, if not unlikelies, for everyone. Likely schools are places where a student should have at least an 80% chance of being accepted. In our day, people often use the term safety school, but most counselors nowadays eschew that term since it's become synonymous with undesirability. I actually prefer to use the term sleep at night, meaning that you can literally rest your head knowing that you're going to be accepted and on your way to college at some point the following year. The possible category includes schools with a 50% of chance of admission, reaches are at about a 25% chance, and unlikely schools are at 5% or less. Ideally, students would have, say, 2 to 3 schools in each category of selectivity. So somewhere in the neighborhood of, say, 8 to 12 schools is what we typically recommend. While that's ideal, it truly all depends on the student and their situation. So for me, it really is more important that two particular conditions are met. And I say this to all of my kids and families, and I say it multiple times because it tends to sink in different ways depending on where we are in the process. However, that final list is constructed, I must feel, as a college counselor, I must feel extremely confident that at least one or two of the schools on the list will come through. It's every college counselor's major nightmare that a kid will get to April and have no options at all. And all college counselors have either experienced or heard enough stories of situations like that over the years that I'm really especially vigilant about making sure that that first condition is met. Even more important, though, is the second condition, and that's about how a student feels about every single one of the schools that's on their list. So say on a scale of 1 to 10, say your dream school is Williams, and on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 15, like literally meaning it's off the charts. You love it that much. I never, ever, ever expect that another school on the list has to be a 15, but honestly, I don't really believe that every other school on the list absolutely has to be a 10. So for me, when I think about it, I say, you know what? If your dream school is here, I never expect every other school to have all the bells and whistles, but it has to have enough so that on a scale of 1 to 10, say it's at least a 7, okay? At least a 7, meaning you know you can be happy, you can be fulfilled, and you can set yourself up well for whatever comes next for you after college. One of the biggest mistakes that I see as a counselor, and I think most of us see that, is that students don't spend very much time at all truly researching the likely schools or the sleep at night schools on their list. So students, the warning here, you must be honest with yourself and not just include places only because you feel confident that you'll get in. If that winds up being your only choice at the end of your application process, you've got to be good with having that school as your option. Would you be disappointed that the others on your list, your 10s, your 15s don't come through? Of course you would, but you need to be able to look at that one or those others in isolation and say, if this is the place that I wind up, I know that I can go and have an experience that I would really like. I'll briefly add here a quick note on applying to tons of reaches and or unlikelies. I always ask students to think hard about a term. I coined it a few years ago. I call it the rejection quotient, essentially like how much bad news is too much bad news. For most, it's hard to know exactly how that would feel since students perhaps have not been through a process like this that makes them or forces them to be so vulnerable. But while it's true that you can't get in unless you apply, I've seen a number of students in the past who regret having taken such a cavalier approach once the bad news begins to roll in. So again, it's one of those things, depends on the person, depends on you as you're going through. Again, just be honest with yourself about that piece. Next slide.
So before I jump into admissions criteria, one thing I would add, CJ, is because there we have, again, a range of students here looking at where our students come from. Some of you have great college counseling offices and guidance counselors who, you work with closely. And some of you will be at schools where I met my guidance counselor for 15 minutes in my 11th grade year, and that was it. And so we get the question a lot, like, how do I know what's a reach, a possible, an unlikely? You want to give like 2 seconds on that as well? Or Allison can jump into. Go ahead, CJ.
Yeah, it doesn't. I can say something quickly. Many schools, high schools, private schools are using programs like Naviance or like SCORE, which uses alumni, their high school's alumni's data and puts it into scattergrams, so you can sort of see trends in the information, the admissions information. It's based on GPA and test scores, and you'll see students if they were admitted, denied, or waitlisted based on that information. So that we find to be really invaluable information in this process. Obviously, as more schools have gone test optional, there's a lot of questions about the validity of some of the information, but it is still helpful to see it at this point and use that information. And I think if you don't have that option, if they don't have Naviance or SCORE, I mean, you can use the information that is listed in the sort of the larger research books, like the Fisk book and things like that. Those are sort of the published numbers that the colleges will give out about sort of the middle 50% range of test scores or the middle 50% range of the GPAs. And that will help you to determine. And then on top of that, I would add, CJ, the selectivity of the school, like all of those pieces together are how you would determine whether or not a school is a really unlikely versus reach versus, sleep at night school.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to throw one other thing I forgot to mention since we're talking about the COVID piece of this. And thanks, Allison, for that. I would have said it exactly the same way. When I threw out that sort of like 8 to 12 is about the average when we talk to folks, I would say in COVID times it's gone up a little bit. It's probably, I've seen that at our school, it's probably more like 10 to 15, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you start multiplying that around the country, around the globe, we're seeing that and we're feeling that. Or people at Williams, they can tell you from an admissions perspective, you're seeing that in the application pool. There's so many more applications that are out there right now, just with that gradual uptick. So again, just sort of looking at within your community, what is that average number and why are people applying to that many?
And one extra thing I'll add for the parents online. A lot of you, again, looking through this are roughly somewhere between Allison's age and some of you are still my age. Look at the admit rates of these schools from 30 years ago, 20 years ago. They have changed dramatically, and you need to really be aware of that. I think students have a better sense of that as they start looking, and sometimes parents can make comments about, that's, you'll get in there, no problem. And that school has probably changed dramatically. So it's worth it for the family members that are online, along with the students, again, like understanding what actually, I just did a presentation to my trustees, and one of the schools I used as a case study was Northeastern University, which 5 years ago had 48,000 applications and about a 30% admit rate, roughly, which I think would surprise a lot of people online. This year they had 50,000 early applications, 92,000 total applications, and their overall admit rate was 7%. So again, like as you're trying to gauge schools, use that term or that number as well. So, okay, so moving on as we kind of keep going here, we think it's important to talk a little bit about, as you started getting to this process now, we've given you a way to hopefully start thinking about it and maybe starting to think about putting schools together. What are colleges looking for in the process? And so if you look at this slide online here, there are several things that colleges are going to look at. Typically, most selective institutions and highly selective institutions use more of a holistic process, which means they're going to look at a combination of things like program and essays and testing and extracurricular activities, letters of recommendation, and so forth. There are schools that are not very selective, and they might use very straightforward credentials. Like if you have these courses with this type of GPA, you're an admit, right? I think, what we'll focus on a little bit here are more of the holistic schools. And again, those are schools that are admitting, probably somewhere between 70% of their applicants and 3% of their applicants or something like that, right? And so just you have a sense of it. I would still say, given COVID, given everything that's going on, program, grades, rigor, that's still probably going to be one of the top things that schools look at. And one of the ways that they're going to gauge that is always by looking at the student in their setting. So most high schools will send along a high school profile, which describes a little bit about that high school, who's there, what kinds of courses it offers, what your average SAT scores or ACT scores are, maybe AP information, just trying to give some context of what's available for the student, and then what have they done with it. So when I did college admissions for a long time, I would have students come up to me quite a bit and say, hey, I have a 3.95 GPA. How does that sound? And honestly, it didn't mean a lot to me until I knew what the context was and where you were and what that meant. Because a 3.95 could be the top of the class, or it could be, at least when I worked in California as a college counselor, that was probably in the bottom half of my class, given the 4.5, 4.7 GPAs that California had. So again, schools are going to use that profile. If you're sitting online right now saying, I don't know what you're talking about, like, probably on your school's website, there's a profile. And if not, you could also always call the guidance office, but just to get a sense of sort of like what colleges are looking at. But they're going to use that first and foremost to really start to gauge, like, what have you done there, right? And again, it's not just about an overall GPA. It's going to be about what classes have you taken? Where have you challenged yourself? I get this question a lot, right? Like, don't I need to take all the top courses and get straight, great grades in every course to get into the top schools? And my answer is, like, it really depends on the high school you're at, right? Like, and in fact, thinking about GPA isn't just in in and of itself in isolation. You need to think about everything that you're doing, right? Because colleges do, right? As you look at this diagram, they're going to look at lots of other things, right? Including, things like your essays. And I think all of us here could do 25 minutes on essays alone, right? But essays are a great way for you to talk about yourself. And I'll go back to what I started with much earlier, reflection, like this idea of, keeping some active reflection and writing down things. That's something that I would also say to use as you think about, what do I want to tell a college about myself, right? Colleges aren't sitting thinking, there isn't something out there that's like, oh, this is what they want to hear. They actually want you to talk about what's important to you. And for you to do that, you have to spend some time thinking about, who am I? What have I done? What do I want to talk about, right? So again, that's way too short on essays, but essays are an important piece of this puzzle. Testing has become a very different beast in the last 2 years, with still probably, 85, 90% of the schools still saying they're going to be test optional this year. Some are saying for the next 3 or 4 years still. So testing has become a bit of a different piece of this. We encourage students, again, right now, if it's safe and it's it's something you can do and you're a good test taker, great, go ahead and take that. That's something that a lot of schools will still accept. There are some schools like the University of California system have made it test blind, so they won't even look at testing at all, even if you've taken it. So you can start to see like how schools are thinking about testing. I think the beauty of the test optional is it's made testing a little bit less important in the process. And it's allowed, I think, more options for students, and it's increased students' ability to apply to some different places. But look at testing, again, like anything else you're going to do. If you want to get good at it, you need to practice it, right? And then right now, I would recommend Khan Academy is a free online resource. It now has ACT prep as well. And that's a great opportunity to kind of use a free online resource to do your testing and to see what you think about it. And then again, like, should I submit testing? Shouldn't I submit testing? That's become a whole conversation now. And again, typically, you can talk with your guidance counselor if you don't have somebody in that role for you. In general, I would say, like, if your testing is sort of at or above their median, like, you can think about submitting it. If it's below that, maybe not. And most colleges have said, when they send out their description of what they did. Right now, it's typically like, 52% of our kids applied without testing, and we admitted, of our admitted class, like 50% of it was admitted without testing. They've been pretty well balanced that way. So testing will be something that's looked at still in different ways. Extracurricular and co-curricular activities are also going to be looked at, your talents, your achievements, these sorts of things. And again, it doesn't have to be strictly, in a school setting. It can be outside of a school setting. It doesn't have to be traditional things like arts, theater, music, athletics, and so forth. It might be something that you're doing, at home. Maybe you have a lot of responsibilities at home. That's something that might take up your time. And colleges also realize that COVID has really disrupted your abilities over the last couple of years to do the things you've loved, right? So if you're sitting there going, I don't have anything to show for my sophomore year in high school, well, guess what? Most other sophomores don't as well, right? And you may also have been in a situation where we've had some students in my school, I work at a boarding school, where they couldn't physically get to campus even though we were here because of where they lived and COVID restrictions. So again, I think, as I mentioned earlier, colleges are going to give some grace. They're going to look at each student individually, hopefully, and really take a look at each student in terms of like what they've had opportunities to do and what that's meant for them. And then, again, finally, things like letters of recommendation. Most schools are looking at, 2 academic letters of recommendation. And what I mean by academic, most colleges are looking for sort of what they would consider core courses like English, history, math, science, a foreign language. Again, I would think if you're an 11th grader right now, not a bad idea to be thinking about who might I want to write those letters of recommendation for me. We actually ask our students to ask them before they leave for the summer, so they have the summer to write them. So again, it may be something you want to think about. Traditionally, it's nice if you can have a break of like, a STEM sort of like one on the STEM side of things and one on the humanities social side. But that's not always the case. And so, for every student's a little bit different. But remember too, like, interestingly, a place like MIT actually requires a humanities recommendation. So they don't just get a math and say a chemistry recommendation. They want something on the humanities side. And again, you may have, I think what you want to be thinking about probably is 11th grade teachers. just because they've known you at probably a higher level. If you happen to take an AP course or an IB class or something at the 10th grade level, that was a really high level course, that may be something you want to consider, but I'd certainly make sure the other one was from an 11th grade teacher. But teacher recs will have an important piece in this puzzle, just because, again, schools are looking for you. How are you in the classroom? The teacher doesn't need to know you outside of the classroom. We actually tell our teachers, unless you're like coaching the student, like I don't need you to write about them outside the classroom, right? What I want you to do is write about them in the classroom, how they're doing, their engagement, and so forth. And then finally, again, if you have a guidance counselor, if you have a college counselor, that's a person who will also be writing a letter. And again, I mentioned I met my guidance counselor for 15 minutes, right? Like, what I should have done was at some point go back in senior year and say, hey, I know you're going to be writing something about me. Let me give you a few things about what I've done and why I've done it, right? Like, you as a student, you need to be proactive in this process and seek out that person. I guarantee you, if you ask for 15 or 20 minutes from your guidance counselor when they're usually putting out fires and dealing with trouble all the time, they'd be probably psyched to sit down for 20 minutes and talk to somebody who's thinking about college and just to kind of get to know you a little bit better. So be proactive on that front as well. They can be super helpful to you and give you the context as well. So I'll leave it there, and we'll go to the next slide, please.
Okay, so we're just going to quickly talk about decision plans. So once you start to sort of refine your list, you're starting to decide, I really like this one school, I definitely want to apply here, I know I want to apply here. The next thing you want to start to look at is what are their admissions plans? So just to talk quickly about the three that you see here. So the first one I want to talk about is the early decision plan. So this is the binding decision. So when you apply early decision, you are saying, if I'm accepted, I will come here. You actually sign an agreement. Your parent signs the agreement. The counselor signs the agreement, saying we all understand what's happening here. That if the student gets in, we're going to pull all the other applications, and the student is going to commit to going there. There's usually an early deadline, sometime around the neighborhood of November 1st or November 15th, and you typically hear back sometime in mid-December, so that the student would know ahead of the sort of the regular decision deadlines to be able to pull their applications. The other early plan is called early action. It's a similar timeline in terms of the application deadline. It used to be that the big difference is that with early action, it's not binding. So if you are admitted, you have until May 1st, the sort of the national decision date that to decide whether or not you want to go to that particular school. In the past, we had seen that students were receiving decisions in like the mid-December timeframe, but as the early action sort of admissions pool has grown, I think there's two pieces. One is that it's gotten bigger, and I think they've had more trouble getting out all of the decisions before January. And also, I think there might be some ED kids in there who've applied to a different school, and they're sort of waiting to see if they're admitted somewhere else and are pulling their application, and they have a better understanding of who is an actual applicant at that school. And then there is another early plan that's not listed on here. It's called restricted early action. It's I think fewer than a handful of colleges actually offer this plan. The restrictions are not on the tail side. It's more the early action where it's not binding, but the restriction is on how many other schools you can actually apply to. Typically what we're seeing is that the college says you're applying here early, restricted early action. You may not apply anywhere early decision. And the only other early applications you can send out are to state schools. That's mostly what I'm seeing. I don't know if sometimes it's a little bit different. So just be aware of that. As I said, there's very, very few colleges that use that, but you do want to know what those restrictions are before you decide to do that kind of application. So then we get over to the regular decision. That is really the bulk of the admissions pool, at least it has been in the past. It tends to be a winter deadline, January 1st, January 15th, February 1st. Students hear back anywhere from end of March to early April. And then they have until May 1st to decide which school they want to apply to. We'll get into this in just a second, but one of the last things I just want to say about the different plans, so you might want to also, we've been talking about admit rates. So we're going to get there for the early plans, but you do want to look at the admit rates for the early pool versus the regular pool, that some of those look very different. And one of the other things you just want to consider, we've talked a little bit about financial aid and the ability to pay for college. Because early decision is a binding decision, if you are admitted, you don't have the possibility of sort of of comparing packages from one school to another. You're sort of stuck with what you get. So oftentimes families you might shy away from an early decision if you're not sure you might be able to get the package that you're looking for. So I'm just going to send it off to the next slide to CJ, who's actually going to talk a little bit more about the selectivity.
All right. So what you see here, this is early advantage. We're actually talking about early decision here, not necessarily early action. Generally speaking, there is an advantage to early decision, oftentimes significant to apply an ED. And this slide shows you a sampling of colleges. The blue line that you see, that sort of light blue line, represents each school's early decision acceptance rate. So over there on the left of it. The red line represents their regular decision rate, or what is that, red, or it actually looks like a different color that I see right here. Maybe it's like a deep blue, represents their regular decision rate. And then the line, that orange line over on the right, represents the overall acceptance rate. And that overall rate is what colleges typically publish. These stats are going to mirror what you'll find at most institutions that offer early decision. And as a result, college counselors, we're finding more and more that students are feeling that pressure to find an early decision school. In fact, and I share this all the time when I do this, I have students every year who come into my office in the fall and say, CJ, like, I know for sure I'm going to apply early decision. I just don't know where yet. And I'm thinking, all right, I get it. I absolutely understand, but that's obviously not an ideal way to approach this if you can avoid it. While no college counselor should ever push a student to apply early decision, if the fit or the match isn't right, data like what you see here shows just how important it is for students at least to consider the option as they start to narrow down their choices. And there's no doubt that early decision is appropriate for the right student, but there are also plenty of mitigating factors for families that can prohibit it from being the right choice. And like Allison just said, having financial aid concerns that require wanting to compare packages or scholarship offers from a variety of schools, or perhaps having ties or legacy at a college that doesn't offer early decision. What I would say, and I'd be interested to see how Sean and Allison respond to this is another one of those things I've seen change a lot with COVID, where early decision, it used to be that, you know, the schools that took the largest percentage of their incoming class early decision were somewhere in, say, that like 40, maybe 45% range, but they didn't want to go above that to allow more space for regular decision kids to apply and actually have a shot. COVID hit, and I understand if I'm on the college side of this, I'm thinking, wow, I don't know what regular decision applications are going to look like. Kids haven't been able to come out and visit. We don't know how many people are really interested. And so what we saw was that colleges were taking the bird in hand and saying, all right, we've got these ED applicants right here. Instead of taking 40% of the class, let's bump up to 50. Or those that were already high, bump from 50 to 60 or even 65%. I understood it for last year. It made regular decision really, really difficult. Yet what we found this year, at least for a lot of the kids or a lot of the schools where our kids were applying, the places that they applied to, even though, you know, COVID restrictions started to lessen a little bit and kids were able to visit campuses and that sort of thing, most of those colleges said, wow, we were able to do this past year with such a large percentage of our kids coming in ED. Let's do the same for the 21-22 cycle. And we're seeing it still. So again, I understand where kids are coming from, where families are coming from. And when people come in and will sort of say, I know that I really need to make a good strategic choice for my ED, I totally understand where they're coming from, yet it hurts at the same time because I know that they're feeling forced to make that decision a lot earlier than they probably can or should.
CJ,
One thing,
go ahead, Allison, go ahead.
I was just going to say that one of the things I think we also want to mention about early decision and admit rates is that while while the admit rate is higher for the ED rounds for the most part, other than Syracuse looks lower, you also have to be a good candidate for the school, right? So applying ED to Columbia when you're, when you're not really in the range of applying there anyway, it's sort of like a really, really huge reach. You're like shooting for the moon thinking like, this is going to get what's going to get me in. It's probably not going to happen. Like that's not the thing that's going to push you over the edge. If you're already a good fit for the school academically, then it's where it really sort of tips the scales in your favor, or can tip the scales in your favor.
And I'd also add too, to CJ's point, COVID has changed this landscape, and I think the impact of early now sort of has a much greater sort of it outweighs sort of like the regular decision numbers now. As I said, you like a place. Let me use Northeastern's a terrific place, but I have their numbers in my head, so I'll use them again. Northeastern has 2 early programs: early decision 1, early decision 2. They also have an early action program. So they have 3 different types of programs their early decision programs 1 and 2 have somewhere between a 25 and a 30% admit rate, and their early action program only has a 6% admit rate or 7% admit rate, and their regular decision admit rate was 6%, right? So that's a significant difference, right? And if you are thinking, you know what, I'm gonna, for students who are, again, strong students who are like, you know what, I like Northeastern, but I think I'll wait till regular. That could swing from being like a possible for you to an unlikely in regular, right? And if you said, you know what, Harvard's my dream school, I'm just going to go there and take a shot at it. I always say to students, we're going to support you wherever you want to go, but just understand what's your risk tolerance, because if you spend it there, where your chances of a 3.14% admit rate this year, I think it was, right? Like for anybody, it's not great. Again, these are some of the challenges, right? And the other piece, I'm going to get to this. The last thing we're going to do before we go to questions, I'm going to talk quickly about financial aid, but there have been a couple of questions about what if I want to go ED, but I have financial aid, I'm applying for aid. I was a full financial aid kid at Williams, and I think about this question all the time. There are great tools you can use to find out now, like what your package will probably look like. And if, and again, I'll talk about that. But if it doesn't work out, if you get a package and it doesn't work for your family, the school will release you from that bond, but they may say to you like, well, but now you're out of our pool, or we're going to put you back into the regular season pool and see what happens. So students who are on aid can take advantage of this because there are good tools, and I'll talk about that a little bit later.
We can go next slide.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to toss in there really, really quickly is interested. Sean talks about Northeastern. I'd be interested to hear what you think about it, Allison. But I know for our board, as I was doing a presentation a couple of weeks ago, that's the one school that I think every college counselor out there is like, here's the test case. We're all talking about Northeastern.
I'm fairly certain my jaw hit the floor when I heard those numbers a few weeks earlier this year. So I'm sure after all of that discussion about admit rates and how hard it's gotten and all of that stuff, now everyone's stress level is exceptionally high and everyone's feeling really overwhelmed. And first, I'm just going to apologize for that. So sorry. However, as Sean mentioned in the very beginning, we cannot control all of these different pieces that are going on, right? Colleges, they are businesses, they have their own priorities, and every year is going to be different. We don't know what next year's applicant pool is going to look like at any particular college, and we don't know what the college is really going to do with that applicant pool. And so to make things feel a little less stressful, right, to feel a little bit like you have a little more control of what's going on, I talk a lot with my students about focus on what you can control, because ultimately that's going to put you in the best position possible. So some of these things, one is, your effort and energy in the classroom. So how hard are you working? Are you engaged? Are you getting good grades? That you have a balanced list of well-researched schools, that you're not just sort of throwing colleges on your list because you randomly heard about it, a friend of yours likes it there or something like that. But then you also have the sleep well in your pillow at night colleges, and you maybe throw in an unlikely, but that you have a good list of schools so that at the end of the day you're going to get some acceptances. Your mindset behind the application and the essays, and what that means is spending time on it, spending time on your essay, and also spending time on the application, making sure that everything is correct. And then another thing that you can control is the demonstrated interest. I think one thing I just want to leave you with is, a lot of times we get asked the question, what do I need to do? Is this going to look good on my application? Is this what they're looking for? And we could come up with a list of 20 things, say, I don't know, and you could think that, oh yes, I've checked all of these boxes, right? I've checked all these boxes, and you might not get in. So I think focus on what you can control will help you to have a more enjoyable experience during this, to feel a little less stressed about it, because ultimately the decision is out of your hands. So control what you can. And I'll go next slide.
Nice. Okay. Thanks, Allison. And again, I think just to quickly tack on that, I'm going to talk financially quickly and we'll jump to questions. But again, the mental health piece, do what you really, try hard in high school, do the things you love to do, and then show that to a college. And I really believe that's the best way to approach it. We talk a lot about that at my school, kind of really engaging in the entire community, do good things, and then go ahead and show that to a college. But I'm going to briefly talk about financial aid. This could be an hour-long conversation. I love this conversation. I've been literally looking at financial aid paperwork since January of 1983, when my mom sat me down and we did our first FAFSA together. And literally, I think every year since then, I have looked at a FAFSA and or a profile. As a college counselor, when I went to grad school, as an admissions person. And I will say a couple things to start with financial aid. There's never a dumb question to answer. I've literally been looking at it for however many years that is, 35 plus years. And I still get confused by the way that colleges will use like terms in different ways. So never be afraid to ask an admission or financial aid person, hey, can you define that term? Or, hey, I lost you. Can you go back? Because I guarantee there's probably 3 other people in the room who also have done that. And this will be helping them as well. I do think, and I think it was CJ who mentioned this up front, and I would sort of double down on this as well. Have the conversation about financial aid as you start the process. Are you applying? Are you not applying? Would merit money help? Like, these are all conversations to have, student with family member, parent, whoever it may be, just so it's clear up front. So it doesn't I've had those same situations where it becomes this crushing, in March, student gets into a school and then family decides like, well, we just didn't think they were going to get in, but we just can't afford that for different types of reasons. So I would encourage you to have that conversation. There are amazing merit opportunities that are out there, especially if you're looking for them. That can be a real plus for a lot of families. So, and again, when I say merit versus need-based, those are the two major forms of aid out there. Merit-based aid has nothing to do with how much a family makes, their income, their resources, any of that. It typically has to do with something a school values, and they're willing to put a dollar value on that. So it might be an academic scholarship for $35,000. It might be a scholarship around music. It might be around arts. Again, the big one that people know a lot about is Division I, Division II athletic scholarships. But I've seen leadership scholarships. There are some amazing big scholarships like the Moorhead Scholarship at UNC, the Jefferson down at UVA, the Park Scholarship at North Carolina State. There's one out at Indiana. There's all these great major full ride scholarships that have leadership positions with them, that have summer stipends with them. So don't look away from those, if that those might be really good options as well. Let me spend a little bit of time talking about need-based aid. And again, this is going to be quick, but hopefully give you just a bit of an overview and encourage you to really lean in. And when I talk about this is for students and families, right? Like, I think, again, the best thing my mother ever did was make me do these forms with her, because there was direct impact on me, how much loan I took out, work study jobs, these sorts of things that were on me. And there was part of it that she had to pay. So a couple of things to think about, again, quickly as you consider financial aid. I've talked about it a little bit already. There are 2 forms that most institutions will use: the FAFSA, the FAFSA, which is the federal form. So if you want to qualify for any kind of federal money, you need to fill that out. Even if you're a family that knows we're not going to qualify for aid, but taking $80,000, by the way, which is where a lot of these schools are right now, taking that out isn't going to be easy for us. You might want to be able to take out that $5,500 loan that your student can get federally, which is a great, it's a low interest rate, and they don't have to start repaying until 6 months after they graduate. Like, even to get that loan, even if you're going to pay it or your child's going to pay it, that's a good one to get. You're going to need to fill out the FAFSA. And there's another form called the profile, the CSS profile, found on the College Board website, where you sign up for SATs and APs and those kinds of things. These are the 2 forms that colleges will use to help determine a financial aid package. They're a little bit different. Things that the FAFSA, for instance, only looks at the household that the student is in, not if the parents are divorced or separated. They only look at the house where the kid lives more than 50% of the time. And they, again, like the CSS profile will look at both biological parents. They'll also take into account things like home equity, which the FAFSA won't use, and so forth. So there's some tweaks in there. I'm not going to get super into the weeds, but there are 2 forms that you need to be aware of. This, to me, is the key to need-based financial aid, right? So if you don't remember anything else I say about financial aid, this is the thing to remember, right? All that the FAFSA and the profile do, right? They are based off of algorithms, right? You pump in this information they ask for, and when it's done, it's going to pull out a number called the Estimated Family Contribution, the EFC. That's all it does. They don't determine financial aid packages, how money is used, how much money you get. The only thing that the FAF, the FAFSA and the profile do is determine what they think the family can afford, for in a given year after you've paid your mortgage, your taxes, clothes, food, all that kind of stuff for your family. This is what's left over for you, right? That's all that two forms do. What colleges do with that varies greatly, right? So again, that to me is the key to need-based aid. Understanding the FAFSA and the profile, you need to fill those out to qualify for aid, to see if you qualify for aid. And all those things will do is tell you, hey, especially on the FAFSA, you can check online once it's done, it'll say your family contribution is X, right? So you'll start to have a sense of that. And what schools do with that varies greatly. How they use that is going to be determined by typically three levers that they pull. One is scholarships and grants. That's the good stuff. That's the stuff that you don't have to pay back. Loans, which again, the average indebtedness of a college graduate right now is around $30,000. And that's basically this federal loan that students qualify for. So you hear about the kids who are $80,000, $100,000, $150,000 in debt. Those are the outliers. The average right now is around 30, and it's that federal loan. And then the other thing you can have is work-study jobs. And again, those are typically things that the college will use, and they're usually very convenient, might be dining hall work. And I worked at the Williamstown Youth Center for 4 years. It was great. Got to play ping pong and pool and hang out with kids and ref basketball games. I also film games for the athletic department, basketball and hockey games. I used to go and see CJ play as well, but I wasn't there anymore, just watching. But again, I would have watched those games anyways. So there are different ways you can get paid, but I'd love to go more in depth. But what I would say to you is you look at this slide, there is a, that myintuition.org, that bottom bullet point, that is a great site where you can go. There's about 60 colleges that use this. It asks you six questions total, and it gives you a pretty decent idea of what you might have to pay. So if you're sitting here as a family thinking, okay, how do I get a ballpark? Go to myintuition.org. There's 60 schools there. Pick one of them, but you can play around a little bit, and you'll see how schools use grant versus loan versus work study is going to vary greatly. Williams is an institution, right, that has just gotten rid of work study. Money's just gotten rid of loans, and so that's going to be very different than a school that uses loans and uses work study money and so forth. So anyways, I'd love to talk longer about financial aid, but that's sort of a primer on that. Lots of colleges do a good job of this, and you can always call colleges if you have more questions. So with that, maybe I'll bring Liz back in. We've got a good half an hour or so for questions.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks to those of you who've already started putting questions in the Q&A. So please keep them coming. And as I said, we'll try to get through as many as we possibly can. So I'm going to sort of jump around here, but I just wanted to start. There are a lot of questions about testing, and thank you, Free, for talking about this already. But let's see, CJ, I'll start with you. So I think despite what colleges say about being test optional, I think rightfully there's still a lot of sort of suspicion on students' parts about whether colleges really mean it. And I'm happy to talk about what it means at Williams in a minute, but can you just talk a little bit about, and Sean, I know you did this already, but just how you counsel your students about A, whether to take the test or not, and then B, how to decide what to do with those scores?
Yeah, wow, it's such a great question that's coming up. And the interesting thing I think about this for me, and most college counselors and college admissions folks feel the same. This is one of those situations where we're writing the playbook after the game has already started. Like we're all trying to figure this out as we go. So many of the things that we say, there are always these caveats like, well, but we don't know how this is going to look. So this is why we try to plan it the way we plan it. So the way that I've gone about this, and the rest of the deans in our office have gone about it, we're telling folks, prep for it, however you prep for it, whether it's Khan Academy, whether you've got something else, prep for it and take the test if you're able to take it, to see where those scores wind up lining up, right? So you can see what they are. And Sean was just talking about it. And again, as college counselors, we didn't know what this was going to look like. The rule of thumb that I kept getting from most of the college admissions officers was, you take, there are 100% of the people who submit tests. Look at the 25% who are at the bottom, the 25% at the top, and then you've got the middle 50%. So what we were told was that if this is where it gets complicated, if your sub scores, whether it's SAT or ACT, it's easier to find on SAT than ACT. But if your sub scores are at least at the bottom of that mid 50% or higher, you should feel free to submit. In a test optional world, you can imagine the only people who start submitting as they get savvy are the ones who have really high testing. So even though we were given that rule of thumb, that figure, that bottom of the mid 50% is also continuing to rise a little bit year by year. So again, to me, it's take it, see what the scores are, and then we'll make a determination a little bit later down the line as to whether or not you submit them to particular schools or not. What we've also heard from colleges, and I've seen this in the data based on the kids who get in and don't get into certain places, it really doesn't seem like it's had much of an impact on our kids' decisions. We keep hearing from colleges, if we have the test, great. If we don't have the test, don't worry about it. We're not thinking about it in those ways. We have no choice but to trust, because again, we're talking about a year, 2 years into this. We have to trust what we're receiving. And I'll say the decisions that we have seen kind of line up with that. So we have put all of our trust in what colleges are telling us. And to date, it seems like it really has worked out that way.
Great, thanks, CJ. And I would just echo that. I think your best bet in this process is to take colleges at their word. There are some, I'm sure many of you saw MIT just decided to move away from its decision to be test optional. I think generally schools are trying to do things that are in students' best interest and in their best interest, and communicating sort of transparently about that as part of that. So I think if the school is test optional, you should feel comfortable applying that way. Okay, Sean, I'm going to go to you next. We talked a little bit about demonstrated interest. And is there a way for students to know which schools track demonstrated interest and which don't? And I think, as we're thinking about sort of mental health and trying to approach this process in as healthy a way as possible, any tips for how students do what they need to do on the demonstrated interest front without losing their minds?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. I think demonstrated interest I think there's some pluses to it because it does, make sure students are actually doing research and actually looking at schools and actually really being thoughtful about that process. Demonstrated research also helps them write a lot of these schools have the essay, why do you want to attend X school? Like if you've done a lot of the work, when a student comes into me and says, I'm almost done, but I'm just really struggling with the why I want to go here essay, I'm like, that's going to tell you something, right? Like you need to do more research as to why you like it. So demonstrated interest isn't sort of this obvious, always sort of a bad thing. I would say to you, the most select, again, this is so rapidly changing. The most selective schools in the country now, that number has, if you say less than 10%, that number has gone up quite a bit. But I would say to you, most schools are going to track interest. How they use it, like Williams tracks interest, right? But you're not using it in your admissions process, right? Well, I'll say to students and families is all the things I just talked about, grades, program, test scores, essays, recommendations, all that kind of stuff, that's still going to be looked at by every school. It just sort of depends, does this admissions enrollment management sit on top? And these things have sway in the process as much as these things do. So I would say to you, most of the schools that traditionally, so I'll say things like Ivy League schools, Stanford, Duke, like schools that have been in this 10% or less for the last 7 or 8 or 9 years, they typically are tracking interest, but not particularly using it in their process. I mean, again, Williams, Harvard, Amherst, these places, they just assume people are going to come, right? They know that's not the case, but that's their assumption. But I would say to you, schools that, that are sort of just maybe off of that cuff, and I know that's a difficult, what's that cuff now? But I do think there are schools that will look really closely, just to see hey, we've sent you a lot of stuff. We've been to your school twice on virtual visits or in-person visits. We're an hour from you. You haven't done the interview. We've never seen you on our campus. Now that is, again, and they'll look to see wow, you live eight hours away. We're not expecting that. But if you live an hour away and you've never been on campus and you've never been at the school or you've never done something virtually, that's all starting to build a picture for them, right? And you can be waitlisted because you just haven't done that. And what I find with demonstrated interest is students, at least that I see quite a bit, is they'll apply early to some, dream school, not get it. And then on December 15th-ish, when that decision comes out, add 10 schools because now they're in panic mode a little bit that they've never researched, they've never been to, and they have no contact history. That's when it can really, I think, bite kids a little bit. It's like, hey, I've increased, I had this good plan of say 14 schools, but then all of a sudden I panicked and I went up to 24, and that extra 10, I have no track record with, and that could impact them, right? So that's the kind of thing where I don't want kids spending hours of time like clicking everything they have to click. But again, with schools that you're really interested in, like, yeah, it's going to help you in the process do a better job. But it also, again, as CJ pointed out earlier, like building a college list. My data I do a lot of number crunching at my school, and once we get over about 13 to 14 applications, expected outcomes plummet, right? Because it's just that much harder to manage interviews and like, do I know the school well? And did I do a good job in follow-up? And am I opening things and all that kind of stuff? So it's a tricky, like I would just say to you, instead of wearing who does and who doesn't, lean in, especially if you're an 11th grader right now, spend the summer doing some of the heavy lifting. That's what we hope our kids will do. Do the research, put together a smart list of schools, and make a good plan.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, Allison, you talked a little bit about different decision plans before, and there's a question about what an ED obligation really means. So if a student applies to a school early decision, is admitted, and then, is it acceptable to keep an application alive at another school? And if they're admitted to that other school, can they back out of the ED obligation? And what would the sort of ramifications be?
So I will say this, there is no legal ramifications, right? Like you're not going to be arrested if you back out of an early decision agreement after you've been admitted. I will say that it looks very poorly upon your school and you as an individual. We have had, it does not happen often, but I can recall a student who did this, I want to say, maybe 10 years ago. And that school was very upset with the student. And I think even maybe spoke with some other schools about it. And was, I would say, particularly hard on us as a school moving forward for a few years. So I think we sort of took the brunt of that for a little while. I can't say that for sure, but that's just the way it felt. I think that it was not a good decision on the kid's part. So I think, again, there's no legal ramifications, but I think the only reason that I would really support, a kid who really needs to back out is for financial reasons, like something has really happened to the family. Maybe somebody's lost a job. They really can no longer afford it. That's totally understandable. But otherwise, you are signing an agreement that says, I understand what I'm doing here. And so at least at my school, if a student comes to me and says, hey, I was admitted early decision to Williams, I say, great, I'm not sending any more information for you. You're done. We're not sending out documentation for you. So even though they could send out an application, right? They're not going to have any supporting documentation from the school.
Thanks, Allison. Okay, CJ, back to you. So we've talked a lot about this early decision or early action piece. Is there a way for students and families to get a good sense of the differential admit rates at different schools between ED and regular? So we know sort of that's the way the landscape has been shifting, but how can they get a sense about specific schools?
Yeah, and that is harder to find a lot of times because, again, what schools tend to publish is the overall acceptance rate and not necessarily exactly what it is early versus regular. If you dig deeply enough, you can usually find that. But this also comes back to, I think, Sean, you were the one talking about a little bit earlier. So much of it really comes down to how you look in the pool from your school. And that pool isn't just for that year. It's 5, maybe 10 years worth of data on what every college out there has done with schools or done with kids who've applied from your particular school. So when I think about it, every school has it, even schools where they may not have as much counseling, usually they're going to have some data somewhere that can be accessible. And you can kind of look at that. That's, to me, it's one of the easier ways to be able to find. You can look and see over the last 5 years, 3 years, 10 years, every single student from my particular school, if they've applied early, if they've applied regular, what does it look like? You can see that for your own setting. But there are other places to find. I'm trying to remember, as we were putting these things together, there are a couple of different places that we would go. Like Sean, Allison, can you think of exactly where you go? I mean, there's so many of them that are out there. And I know that there's some that families can have access to as well. I'm just thinking, like, where would they find that? Unlike where we might find it, like any place that's easy for them to find it, other than talking to their school counselor.
I don't know, Liz, I don't know, maybe you guys do this, but I'm wondering if, you know, if you dig a little bit deeper into the admissions website, if like something's published there about the admit rate from the previous year, I would think that it's either there or it's got to be some, or you can just ask the question would be my guess.
Oh yeah, that's true too.
Yeah, I would say this isn't, in my experience, this isn't a statistic that often gets published in an easy to find place. I think it's perfectly appropriate to ask. And you know, the other thing I'll say, and this is really getting into the weeds, but every college has something called a common data set on their website, and there's sometimes interesting information that you can sort of glean there about admission trends at schools. That's like can really go down a rabbit hole. So this is like, you know, if you have identified a good list of schools and are looking to get a little more texture about a small set of schools on your list, the common data set can be a good option. All right, thanks, CJ. Sean, I'm going to ask you kind of a two-part question here. So I'm sure there are lots of folks on this call who are wishing that they had the chance to work with counselors like the three of you all day to day. And so two kind of questions about if you are coming from a situation where you aren't so fortunate. So one is, any thoughts you can share about whether or not families should consider trying to find an independent college counselor to work with if they don't have easy access to a counselor at their school? And then also for students who are applying from high schools who might not have a sort of long track record of sending students to some of the schools that they're interested in, how they should factor that in as they're building their lists.
Yeah, so it's interesting that the independent counselor question, there are a lot of really good independent counselors, folks who have done admissions work, been college counselors, and now are sort of transitioning into doing that kind of work. Like anything else you do, I would do your homework. I would look closely at the people's credentials. I'd look, you know, maybe talk with folks who have worked with those folks, and really try to get a sense of what their approach is, because you will see a really wide array of approaches that college counselors, independent college counselors take. And again, if you're at a high school like CJ's or mine, where it's like, you know, our counseling loads are, you know, probably between 30 and 45 kids. Allison, you're probably higher than that at a public institution, right? You know, like I always like in that kind of situation, if you have that type of situation at a private institution, that can be really challenging for the student, because then you put them between two different people. Typically, the independent counselor doesn't have a great context, especially in the last 2 years of COVID, like what it means now at your school to have this kind of GPA, this kind of situation. And that can be challenging, right? And so my hope is, and I talk with, you know, I know that there are families at my school that have independent counselors, but sometimes those counselors do a little bit of testing, test prep, and read essays. Sometimes they do build lists, but independent counselors cannot call schools, talk about the student. They cannot write letters of recommendation to that school. So again, I think if you're at a private institution, I would really like, if you're, you know, have your child lean into like really getting to know the counselor and working with a counselor well. Again, if you're at a public school, like I was, where again, there were maybe 350 kids in my senior class, and maybe 40% of us went to four-year colleges. I think, you know, like, how do you gauge that? You know, is it, you know, I would still first check in with your guidance counselor, see what their bandwidth is, like try to get a sense of what they have. But also if there are opportunities out there, like College Greenlight is a nonprofit site that does a great job with sort of walking kids through the process a little bit. If there is an independent person in your area, again, just be really careful to kind of make sure you research them a little bit and get a good sense of what their values are and how they think about this process, right? So again, it can be a little bit, it's typically word of mouth maybe in a lot of communities, but I would, you know, again, I would just be careful to make sure you find somebody who has, has done some work in the area, is thoughtful about the process, and I would always want to put the student first in the process. And if someone's talking to you right about where do you want your kid to go, that's not probably the starting place that I'd want to have working with my sixth grader in a couple of years. So again, that's what I would caution you with that. There are some, and again, there is the group that we all belong to called NACAC, which is a National Association of College and Admissions Counselors. They actually have a subset of people in that group who are independent counselors who sign a bunch of different things and saying they're going to be ethical and all these kinds of things as well. And that may be another good thing to look for. The second part, Liz, remind me the second part now as I've gotten well into the independent counsel.
Yeah, just, how families should think about it if their child is attending a high school that hasn't traditionally sent students to the colleges that they're most interested in.
Yep. Yeah. So here's the thing. I hear this a lot about, Andover or Harvard Westlake has this great, relationship with these folks, and Concord Carlisle always gets kids. That to me is not a thing. I just don't, again, as you know, Liz, as someone who hires people, admissions offices are, there's a lot of turnover in college admissions offices. They're looking for the most interesting, best kids in their pool. Like they're not saying, like where I am, they're not saying, we have to get 5 kids from your high school. If there aren't 5 kids, they're not going to take 5 kids. If there are 9 really cool, interesting kids, they'll probably do that. Right. So to me, it's not so much about them not having a relationship as much as, again, are you, have you done your homework for that school? Do you think it fits your interests and you're a good fit for that school, and you putting together the best application you can, right? I especially with COVID and this explosion of applications, colleges now have applications from places they've never heard of. And they're taking kids from places they've never heard of before. And again, I think, I talk about college admission, it is an art and it is a science, right? People always talk about, it's a total crapshoot at the highest levels. It's not. There's a level of excellence in terms of it. We talked about grades, program, extracurriculars, all that kind of stuff you have to get to sort of the table. But once you get to the table, there's a lot of things that can influence, these are human beings sitting around a table. I can remember sitting around a table with 12 people and 8 people had to raise their hand for a yes. And if we just admitted 3 people in a row and you came up number 4 and we know we have to be tough, that might be a tough place to have come up, right? So there is a little bit of, art in that science of like how this works. It's not so much, this school has got the pipeline here and this like that type of thing. So I would be more like, if it's a good fit for you, and it fits in your, in a good balanced list, then go with that and not worry so much, I think I was the first person admitted to Williams from my high school in 25 years, right? And I didn't even know, at the time I had no idea. Right now you have a much better sense of that. But I think it's much more about the student and presenting yourself well, as opposed to like, I've been in this business for 33 years. I know most deans and directors now because I'm old. And they are not going to, I know Liz and I work together. If I called Liz and said, hey, Liz, I got this great kid for you, she would say to me, Sean, that's inappropriate. Right? Like you've got a lot of other kids in this pool, like we're not having this conversation, right? So again, I think people worry. I had this exact conversation with my trustees 2 months ago. I think people worry that there are people making these phone calls and their kids are getting an upper hand, and like Harvard Westlake can make this and Andover can do this, but not Concord Carlisle. Like I have and I actually completely agree with that. I think the access and equity piece is really important. And like my kids already have enough of an advantage having 35 kids to a counselor. They don't need an extra advantage that way. So I try to dispel that rumor as much as I can.
Thanks, Sean. And just to give people a sense, we admitted just shy of 1,200 students at Williams this year. And I think we had just a little over 1,000 different high schools represented among those 1,200 students. So, there are schools from which we get 75 applications. There are schools from which we get 1. And as Sean said, we're really trying to build the most sort of exciting dynamic community. So, okay. Allison, we talked a little bit about essays before, and I think Sean said it, we could spend 30 minutes on essays alone. We've only got 6 minutes left, but just for folks who are sort of in that moment where they're heading into the summer and thinking about how do I start this process? We talked a little bit about reflecting, but any tips for, good topics, bad topics, just any kind of tricks of the trade?
Sure. So I think my first piece of advice is that there's no right topic. Admissions officers are not looking for a student to be talking about something in particular. I often get the question like, well, should my kid go do this service trip so then they can write about it, right, in their college essay? And I'm like, if they want to, I don't know. I mean, right, like all of this is about what is important to the student and what's going to make them happy. The other thing I would say is if the student is bored writing the essay, the admissions counselor is going to be bored reading the essay, right? I think how you feel about the topic, how you're writing it is going to come out in the essay. I think, one of the things I try to do is to put this into perspective for kids too. When you're thinking about writing the essay, think about being that college admissions person. And sorry, Liz, but I'm just going to say what I say to my kids, which is, you hope that you get them at, it's like 9:30 in the morning. They've had their coffee. The kids are gone. It's nice and quiet. They've had a good night's sleep and everything's going great. So they have full attention into what they're doing. But you also have to sort of assume that like maybe they're sitting in their car waiting for the kids at pickup, right? Sort of like reading things on the fly. Maybe they didn't have a good night's sleep. Maybe it's not a good day for them. And so how do you have an impact then with your essay? If, as I said, if you're bored writing it, they're going to be bored reading it. You want to grab their attention and grab it early. I think if you want to write if you decide to write about that service trip, don't just write about the trip and say, I learned a lot about myself, right? That's very, very cliche. You want to choose something about the trip that was so impactful to you and how it impacted you, not just that it impacted you. I don't know if you guys have other pieces of advice, but
I'll just jump in and say, I think it's helpful to, and we sort of touched on this before, but sort of step back and think about what are the things that are already sort of covered in your application. So there's a chart where you're going to share what kind of extracurriculars you're involved in. Your letters of recommendation are going to tell the admission committee something about sort of how you engage in the classroom. And I always think the essay is a helpful moment to think, okay, what's the sort of meaningful thing about me? And it doesn't have to be this earth-shattering thing, but what's something that you feel like is a really core part of who you are that you want to make sure the admission committee knows that isn't coming out anywhere else in the application. So use it as an opportunity to illuminate something that your recommendation writers aren't talking about, that your extracurriculars won't tell about, because I think that's when the essays can be most helpful. The other thing I'll say is, I think different admission officers would have different opinions on this, but I think the essay is the thing that gets sort of most blown out of proportion in this process. At a place like Williams and schools like it, beyond the topic, the quality of your writing matters a whole lot. It's also very easy to tell when the writing in an essay doesn't align with the writing that's been going on throughout high school. We look for synergy there between what counselors and teachers are telling us and the writing we see. So writing that is authentic, that is done by you, that is in your voice and about something that is really authentically important to you. I think those are the most successful essays. And no topic is going to be the thing that does or doesn't get you into a place, obviously within reason. You want to make good choices, but I think just trying to put yourself, as cliche as it sounds, onto the paper in a kind of authentic way will serve you best in the essay process. Okay, as always, we get to 8:30 too quickly. I apologize. There are a bunch of questions here that we haven't gotten to. Please know that all of us in the Williams Admission Office are happy to serve as a resource going forward, certainly about Williams, but about the process more broadly. And you can reach us at admission@williams.edu. So please feel free to follow up with any questions we didn't get to. As I mentioned at the beginning, this program's been recorded and we'll push it out to everybody who signed on tonight within the next week or so. So you'll be able to refer back to it. as you're heading into this process in the months ahead. I want to thank Sean and CJ and Allison so much. The school year is coming to a close. It's been a long one, and I'm just so grateful to the three of you for being here tonight and for being such good friends and colleagues along the way. To everybody on the call, thanks for carving out time to be with us. I wish you good health in the months ahead, and I look forward to seeing everybody on campus at some point soon, and good luck getting to the end of the academic year. Thanks so much. Be well. Bye-bye.